It started with a scream that no one else heard, just the night nurse alone in the corridor, frozen as every light flickered off one by one. When they came back on, the bed she'd been standing beside was empty, and the call button was still pressed down. That's the thing about working nights. The world looks the same, but something beneath it wakes up. And those who stay to witness it rarely forget. This is Mr. BlackWhisper. The first time the call light blinked over bed 6, I ignored it. That corner of the oncology step-down had been cleared for renovation, the mattresses stacked on their sides like enormous gray books, plastic sheeting taped over the doorframe. No patient, no bed, no reason for a call. But the light stayed on, a steady amber pulse on the central board. It was after 2 a.m., and the unit was breathing in that deep, uneasy way hospitals do at night. Monitors humming, vents sighing, that faraway elevator ding. I pressed the reset and the light went dark. 3 minutes later it came back. I told myself it was dust or a loose contact. Old hospitals are full of ghosts that are just wires. Still, when you work nights, you learn to be polite with whatever shares the dark with you. So I checked the door, tugged the plastic aside, and stepped into the cold. It smelled like plaster and lemon cleaner. The room had been stripped down to its bones. Head wall with ports capped, rails folded in, the call button's square plate still there, but the cable snipped. No curtains, no bedside table. Just my reflection in the black window, a thin nurse in tired scrubs, hair pulled back too tight. I stood there, waiting for my eyes to adjust. Maintenance. I said it to the air, half an apology. You're making my board crazy. Something answered, not in words, more like a shift in pressure, that odd pop you feel in your ears when an elevator starts to move. The temperature wavered and the hairs on my forearms stood up. It wasn't fear yet, just attention. I reset the plate anyway, even though it wasn't connected, and I went back to the desk. At 2:17 a.m., the light over bed 6 blinked again. By then, we were short-staffed and stretched, and under the fatigue was that sour, guilty feeling you get when you can't be everywhere at once. I called facilities. The man there had the flat, amused tone of someone who only ever hears about problems at the worst possible hour. He checked the panel and said there was no draw from 6. He asked if maybe a confused patient was wondering, pressing anything that looked like a button. Everyone's in a bed, I said, and immediately didn't believe myself. On nights, the thing you fear most isn't the supernatural. It's missing something obvious. The light went off, then on, then off again, like someone testing whether it still worked. I took a flashlight. I took the habit you learn in hospitals, which is to move quietly and announce yourself before every threshold. Nurse. So if anyone is in a place they shouldn't be, they have a second to be human again. The plastic crinkled as I went in. I swept the light over blank walls, the head wall plate, the empty corners. There were footprints. Just one set, faint, powdery. Someone had walked in and turned, pivoting on the heel. I knelt and touched the dust. Cool. Fresh enough that it clung to my glove. Not boot treads. Hospital socks. I radioed my charge. We started the quiet cascade. Check rooms, count heads, glance at monitors. Room 612, sleeping. 614, TV snowing. 616, Mrs. Shue coughing softly. 618, empty, charted to imaging. 620, Bed A snored. Bed B was a hill of blankets with a hand on top, age-spotted and still. Bed C was empty. The band on the rail said C belonged to Mr. Sloan, 82, admitted with dehydration and delirium after a fall at home. Wander risk. We had posted a bright yellow leaf on his door hours earlier and tucked a soft belt through his gown, the kind that doesn't restrain so much as remind. Stay with us, I had said as I tucked him in. He had stared past me like a man trying to find the end of a long, overgrown path. I whispered his name as I stepped through the plastic again. I didn't want to scare him. I didn't want to scare myself. "Mr. Sloan? It's late. Let's go back to bed." The flashlight beam slid across the floor and caught on a shimmer. Water. A small spill spreading in a round, patient way. I followed it to the head wall. The capped oxygen port was fine. The suction was fine. The sink. The sink was on, a thin silver thread of water pouring into a basin that had no drain yet, pooling, then running over. The call plate, dead and snipped, was wet where a hand had pressed it. There was sleep talk from the far corner, a dry mumble. The flashlight found him sitting on the bare mattress leaning against the wall. Someone had pulled it down from the stack. He had tucked his socked feet underneath. The yellow fall-risk slippers darkened at the toes. He looked at the sink like a pilgrim looks at a spring. "I pushed," he said when he noticed me, voice hoarse and child-soft. "It turned the water on last time." I wanted to tell him the truth about call lights and plumbing, about how nothing in this room was connected, but it felt unkind. He'd walked here alone, through a sleeping ward and a taped door, because thirst had rewritten his world. I shut off the sink and knelt to wipe his socks with a towel, as if removing water could unwrite what I'd missed. I offered my arm. He took it and let me help him stand. Under my hand, he felt as light and brittle as a bundled sheaf of papers, the kind that dusts your palms when you touch it. We got him back to 620, warmed him, checked his sugars and pressure. He drifted off with the cup of water on the table under the reach of his hand. I reset the bed alarm. I fixed the yellow leaf on the door. When facilities came up an hour later, they found moisture inside the dead call plate in 6. They replaced it anyway. New plastic, clean screws. I changed my shoes because the bottoms were white with plaster dust. At 6:03 a.m., just before shift change, Mr. Sloan's monitor printed a short, ugly strip and then stopped. We were there within seconds. We did what you do. We did all of it. We kept his chest moving while the sun pushed a faint light into the edges of the blinds. It was enough. And then it wasn't. Finally, there was only the formal quiet of a body at rest. I sat for a moment after, in the room with the blinds half open, listening to the vents, watching the cup on the table catching light. I thought about bed 6 and its light that wasn't a light, a plate that wasn't connected, a sink that poured where there was no drain. I thought about how he had pressed something that should not have worked and walked toward the sound of water as if the hospital itself had called him. They sealed bed 6 that morning for real this time. New drywall, new paint. The little square where a hand had once pushed is just a rectangle now, flush and blank. Nights later, I still see it blink when I close my eyes. Not a ghost, not a glitch, just a reminder. The worst fear on nights isn't what's hiding in the dark. It's the light you almost don't answer. And sometimes it's the thirst you don't hear until it's gone quiet. On the highway map, my rest area is a forgettable dot between 2 exits people actually remember. By day, it looks like the kind of place families eat vending machine sandwiches under buzzing flies. By night, it becomes the waiting room of a country that never sleeps. Truckers napping with engines rumbling, kids walking their dogs in pajamas, a very occasional argument that starts low and becomes everyone's business if it goes on too long. I work the graveyard shift, 2 to 10-minute cleans, coffee that tastes like tar, a plastic radio that picks up weather reports from stations I can't name. The nights blur if you let them. You notice what doesn't blur. The sedan rolled in at 12:11 a.m. and parked 3 spaces from the bathroom door under the floodlight that flickered sometimes in wind. Dark paint, tinted windows, temporary plate with crooked tape, engine on, headlights off. The air from the vents fogged the windshield from the inside in a faint, steady oval. I cleaned the men's room, then the women's, then emptied the bins. I wiped the maps with a cloth that left more streaks than it removed. The sedan idled. At 1:07, I walked by with a broom. The driver's seat was reclined. It looked empty. At 1:31, A trucker in a blue cap asked if I had change for a 10. The sedan idled. At 2:03, I was sweeping leaves out of the fluorescent pool by the door when the bathroom's motion-activated fan whirred and a man in a dark hoodie came out. He had the kind of road face you get when you've been driving too long. Stubble, pale around the eyes, the tightness of caffeine. He looked at me, looked past me. He went to the sedan and got in. The fog oval cleared for a second when he opened the door, then reformed. He didn't leave. There's a kind of quiet that's not empty. It's watchful. Maybe that's my job, turning me superstitious, but the hair on my arms prickled the way it does when a storm is close. I told myself to be practical. Tinted windows, running car, late hour. Sometimes the simple explanation is a sleeping driver with a bad alternator. On my third pass, I saw the sticker on the back bumper. 2 cartoon kids' faces, the kind people buy at a kiosk, peeling at the edges. Beside it, a scrape that had picked up rust. I walked closer with the broom like a prop and noticed something I couldn't unread. 5 small ovals of clean glass low on the rear passenger window, like someone had pressed their fingertips there and held them. The prints were smeared downward toward the door seam. I told my mind to stop. I told my heart to slow down. I have no authority beyond soap and keys. I have no gun, no badge. I have a radio that the troopers occasionally answer, and a sign that says, "Rest area closed from 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. for cleaning," which we never enforce. I knocked. The engine ticked. The floodlight hummed. The night watched. The driver's door opened with a soft pop. Up close, he looked younger than I'd guessed, or maybe just more tired. He smiled the way people smile when they're not sure if you're about to cause trouble. "Everything okay?" "Routine," I said. "We've had catalytic converter thieves. You staying long?" "An hour," he said. "Just need to rest my eyes." He drummed his fingers on the door, casual. "You guys got coffee?" "In the machine," I said. He went to the machine. He put money in and stared at it as if it were a living thing. He didn't turn his back on me. My heart had started to do the hard thud that makes your throat feel small. I walked to the car, slow, like I had dropped something. Up close, the engine's hum felt cooler than it sounded. The rear window's tint had a bubble in it near the top. Through the bubble, I could see shapes. A blanket. A pale something like a shin. No, not a shin. Plastic. A car seat. It faced backward. The blanket was tucked so tightly it felt like an instruction more than comfort. The air vent behind the console was on low, blowing into the cocoon. My hand knew what it was going to do before any noble thought formed. I tried the rear door. Locked. I leaned close, and the bubble let me see the line of a small sneaker. It jiggled once, like someone had nudged it with their knee from the inside. I heard the paper cup clunk from the machine. I pulled back before it looked like I was peering. When he came back, he had a lid and a smile. "You got kids?" I asked, ruining any pretense of casual conversation. My voice sounded too loud to me in that empty lot. He sipped. "Nah." The lie dropped into the space between us like a tool on concrete. Sometimes fear doesn't sharpen you. It makes you clumsy. I said, "We close the lot at 3 for cleaning," which we don't. Troopers do a sweep, which they sometimes do. They'll knock on every window, which they never have. He looked at the time on his phone. He didn't flinch. "We'll be gone." We. He got in and started to shift into reverse, then stopped. He put the car in park and stared past the windshield at nothing. I could hear the radio in my booth hissing in its base, the voice of a weatherwoman listing counties I didn't live in. He was thinking. I was thinking. The night breathed. When he left, I went straight to the booth and picked up the trooper's line. My hands shook so much I hit the wrong button and had to breathe like I was blowing out candles to get enough control to press the right one. "What do you say?" "You learn to be specific. You say the make, the temporary plate, the bumper sticker with faces, the scrape. You say, rear passenger window has child prints. and you say it in a voice you're not proud of because it's thin with something you haven't allowed yourself to feel yet. They found the car at the next exit, pulled over for a loose license plate. I learned that phrase from the trooper who came back 2 hours later to take my statement, his hat under his arm, his eyes too serious for the sunrise. He didn't tell me much. He didn't have to. There are sentences you can finish yourself. A young girl sat in my booth after, wrapped in a state blanket, drinking something too sweet from my vending machine because that's what I had. She watched the parking lot like she expected it to move. When she finally looked up at me, her voice was so small the night could have swallowed it. "Is it okay to be loud now?" I said yes. I wanted to say other things, but yes felt like the only true word. On my next shift, I wiped fingerprints from the window of a car that wasn't there. I swept a lot that wasn't dirty. I stood under a light that flickered like a heartbeat in wind and listened to engines come and go. If you do this work long enough, you begin to believe silence has a shape. Sometimes it's an empty lane. Sometimes it's a door you didn't try. Now when a car stays, I pay attention to the ways it stays. I notice the oval of clear glass, the way a blanket is tucked, the lies that are too small. And I remember that question asked in a voice you have to lean toward to hear. Is it okay to be loud now? Night security in a downtown office tower is 90% walking in circles and 10% convincing yourself the building isn't a living thing. The elevators talk to themselves, the vents sing. Motion sensors decide you're important and then forget you exist. I clock in at 10 p.m., make rounds with a flashlight like a prop in a play, and try not to think about how much glass is around me and how little of it is meant for seeing out. Floor 19 is empty. It has been empty since the firm that rented it dissolved in a quiet scandal that left behind only a brass plaque we covered with painter's tape. The carpets are a little different there. The hall wider by a few inches. The lights too bright when they come on. At 2:14 a.m. on a Tuesday, motion pinged on 19. It does that sometimes. Pigeons hit the windows and set off the sensor, or a vent coughs. The first time it happened to me, I took the stairs with the adrenaline of a man auditioning for bravery. The second time, I took the elevator because the stairs smell like dust and old paper at night, and that makes your mind write stories. The fifth time, I still felt my heart lift. The doors opened onto carpet and the lights came on row by row in a polite wave. The hallway stretched left and right, identical doors with small keypads beside them. The office at the end, where the partners had used to meet, had glass walls and a view of the city's dark shoulder. Someone was inside. He sat at the far end of the conference table, laptop open, the kind of glow that makes faces into masks. Blue light, hands typing fast, shoulders high. He wore a white shirt rolled at the sleeves, and a tie loosened as if the night had only just now gotten to him. I knew the floor was empty. I knew locks well enough to know what they sound like when they don't want to keep out someone with the right codes. I didn't draw the flashlight. I hate the way it makes me feel like I'm pretending to be a cop. I cleared my throat. He looked up with that wild, startled flash you see when a door opens on someone convinced they're alone. Then he smiled. "Sorry," he said low, like the building was a library. "I should have put my name on the late work list." There is no late work list. There used to be a policy, a form by the freight elevator, but it died with the carpet. I said the thing I say when I don't know the right thing. "You got a badge?" He lifted it from his belt. My eyes are trained to see expiration dates. He held it long enough for me to clock the logo, short enough that the rest became memory in motion. The lanyard looked old, the clip looked fresh. "I'll be quick," he said. "Server migration. We discovered something we should have discovered months ago." The words were so office true they felt like lullaby. He went back to the keyboard. The screen was angled away, reflection of blinds in a city scribbled with lights. I stayed because leaving would have felt like a decision I shouldn't make alone. "Server room's locked," I said. "Facilities is off until 6. He didn't look up. "Door let me in. Old code still works." "We have changed the codes 3 times since 19 went dark." My mouth tasted metallic, the way it does when you lie to yourself and hope your body believes you. I said, "Sign out when you're done," and I left the way you leave a sleeping child, quietly, apologizing to the air. Back at the desk, I ran the badge logs. No entry on 19 since the cleaning crew left at midnight. The last recorded access for that ID number was 2 years old. The name attached to it unspooled a memory. One of the mid-levels who didn't make the press release, the kind that keeps the lights on with spreadsheets until the day the lights go out. Motion pinged again at 2:24, at 2:31, at 2:47. My camera feed for 19 is an insult. One angle of a hallway that could be anywhere, with a view of an emergency exit that never opens. At 3:02, I took the elevator back up. The lights came on in their polite wave. The conference room was empty. The chair was pushed in. The laptop was gone. On the whiteboard at the far wall, where the dry erase ghost of old numbers never really fades, there was one new line: "Don't turn off the light." It's a joke, I thought. Or worse, it's taste. A nice little haunting for the bored night guard. I wiped it away with my sleeve and felt my mouth go dry. The marker left a faint shadow of the sentence like writing on skin. The server room door was closed. The keypad blinked red. I stood there longer than I needed to, listening to the HVAC knock and recalibrate like someone knocking back. The next night, Motion pinged at 2:14 again. I went up thinking I would catch him signing, or not signing. The conference room held the blue glow of a screensaver. The whiteboard was clean. My chest unclenched in a way that made me feel foolish. When I turned to leave, the lights began to die behind me, one by one, in a polite wave that moved the other direction now. The hallway beyond the glass sank into a softer gray. It was a small flaw in the timing, the kind buildings hide in plain sight, but it felt intentional. 9 panels went dark. I walked to the elevator. 8. The elevator was slow. The button lit up with the calm of a sleeping eye. 7. Something brushed the corner of my mind, like remembering a name in a room where you're not supposed to say it. The server room door was ajar, just a fraction, enough to change the sound of the air in the hall. 6. I opened it. The fans roared, that relentless white noise that makes your thoughts feel like paper in wind. The cages were empty, the racks were bare. Someone had left a folding chair in the center of the room, the kind they bring out for temporary guests. On the seat was a badge, the same logo, the same name, 5. The badge was cold. The plastic had that brittle old sun smell. On a strip of white tape over the photo, a number had been written in marker. It took me too long to recognize it as a time. 2:14:4. The door behind me feathered as if pushed and then not. There is a trick in buildings where pressure shifts and makes doors seduce themselves shut. The fans filled the room like a body fills a suit. 3. I put the badge down. I stepped into the hall. The last 3 panels were still lit between me and the elevator, a thin river of safety. I didn't run. Running announces you to an empty floor in a way walking doesn't. I walked and pressed the button and stood with my back to the metal, watching the light diminish in the carpet nap as if night itself were being poured down the hall like water. The door slid open. I got in. I did not look up again at 19 until morning. Facilities changed codes. I submitted a report with words that looked normal. At 2:14 the following night, Motion pinged again. None of us went up. We sat at the desk and let the building make its own decisions. Sometimes that's the work, choosing what you don't chase. Weeks later, the property manager found me on a quiet Sunday. She had a folder she didn't want to be carrying. "You were on duty the night of the merger fiasco," she said, and my mind clicked through headlines and emails. "Do you remember this name?" I did. The badge in the server room. The mid-level no one wrote about. He hadn't been laid off, she said. He had been retained for transition. He'd worked late for weeks. He'd sent one last email time-stamped 2:14 a.m. The subject line was only the word light. No one saw him again after that. It's easy to let a building turn myth on you. It's harder to accept how much of the night in a city is made by people doing a little more than anyone asked. until they're too tired to stop. The wave lights on 19 still sometimes go out in the wrong direction. When they do, I stand under the camera with my hands in my pockets and listen to the fans on the other side of a door with a code that doesn't matter. I tell myself the simplest story. Someone with an old badge and a bad habit. Someone who preferred to work when no one would interrupt and taught the building to like it too. And sometimes when the board pings at 2:14 and the polite wave begins, I remember the whiteboard and the sentence written in someone's night hand. Don't turn off the light.